Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're tuning in. This is the first episode of the Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports of 2023. I got Bentley with me. You might recognize him from Backyard Buckets. How you doing, bud?
Great, man. I'm doing real well. I'm stoked to be here talking with you about a brand new college football season, the last semi normal season we get before the playoff expands and conference realignment takes over. This is going to be a special year, man. I'm real excited.
Yeah, I'm curious since you brought it up. How do you feel about the conference realignment? I know you and I have talked a little bit about it offline, but how do you feel about it kind of long term in terms of maybe the health of the college game?
So I'm somewhat of a traditionalist myself. I love rivalries. We're going to talk about one of my favorite ones tonight here as the pod goes on. For those tuning in that don't know, I'm a huge Duke basketball fan. So the Tobacco Road rivalry really holds a special place in my heart. And to hear that, like, obviously this is a football podcast, but it kind of correlates, right? Like to hear the talk of potentially North Carolina going to the SEC or the ACC kind of splitting between the Big Ten and whatnot. That affects basketball as well as football, right? So those things are tough to hear, and I don't love it because the regional rivalries are really what drive college sports, in my opinion. I think it also is denigrating to the other sports in collegiate athletics, where you got the softball team going to play like a triple header from Wisconsin. They're going to Southern California to play like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday series or something like that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. We obviously know the answer is money. So I get it from that perspective. Um, but what I would love to see is what the finished product looks like, right? Like I just kind of like I've accepted that we're moving and we're changing, but I'm ready to get to that point where I know what it looks like and I can accept what the final change is and kind of move on and embrace what the new product looks like.
Yeah, I think it's always kind of had this air of inevitability since probably I want to say maybe the kind of early 2000s, even when you started to see like the Big Ten and the SEC posturing, and then the Pac-10, then now the Pac-12. Kind of answered the bell by bringing in a couple of teams as well, and you saw some shuffling between each conference. It's kind of been the writing on the wall, but you're absolutely right, right? It doesn't soften the blow of potentially losing some of these big time rivalries, and I hope that maybe by way of schedule makers and the ADs, we might still see some of these games, right? Like Duke North Carolina play basketball every season, schedule an out of conference game. And then you look at, some of these in conference rivalries that may be splitting up. Maybe we'll see the ADs try to find ways to keep those on the schedule. But, it's really tough to see. It was always, certainly we've all been kind of just bracing for shock for the last 2 decades to like, when are we going to end up in a situation where we've got these super conferences? Because that was the trend, right? As the SEC bolstered to, with a 16 teams now, and then we always thought they were going to go bigger and keep going and keep bringing in bigger schools. And I do think long term, it is about money. It's about TV rights. It's about bringing in the bigger brands to these bigger conferences that have bigger TV deals. That's the only reason USC's in the Big Ten. That's the only reason they brought Oregon in as well, because Oregon's got all the Nike money, and the conference sees the dollar signs there. But it kind of sucks to think about the fact that like USC is going to be playing in the Midwest, right? And it was weird when Maryland went to the Big Ten, because they're not regionally really affiliated, and Rutgers as well, which was kind of an afterthought at the time. But the regional affiliation of college sports is such a big deal. When we get these teams that meet up in the playoffs and we see them on these neutral sites, that's when it's really cool to see like a USC playing Ohio State. Not not because they're in the same conference, right? It's just it's weird, and you mentioned it too, right? The other sports are going to pay a huge toll trying to travel. I know football pays the bill, right? I've talked to a lot of people about this in amateur sports. Um, all these other sports, there's a lot of people that say like, well, if football teams are getting all this money from the schools, why isn't the tennis team, or why isn't field hockey, or why isn't lacrosse, right? Well, go to a college field hockey game, go to a college lacrosse game, and you'll see it's like you and then the family of the team, right? And
Mhm.
that's just the unfortunate truth. You go to football games, you go to these big time basketball games, those are the revenue sports. And I'll take it even a step further, and I'll say baseball, even, right? As popular as baseball is, it's America's pastime. Go to a midweek game, in the SEC even, and you're not going to see full stands.
Yeah.
Weekends, you're probably going to see it. Rivalry games, your rivalry series, you're absolutely going to see it. You get toward the end of the season with the tournaments, you see it, but you don't see it during the week on an average day, especially at these smaller, Division I schools. So it is money. Football pays the bills. Football moves the needle. And that's why all this realignment's coming, because there's big brands in football that aren't big brands in other sports. Nobody knows about, like UCLA's lacrosse program. It's terrible, right? But that's not why the Big Ten is trying to bring in UCLA, right? So, all
I
right,
I will make one note off of
yeah, yeah,
what you said there. You mentioned Southern Cal playing in the Midwest, specifically like Michigan and Ohio State. So technically, I believe the way like the schedules are going to play out, that will only be once every 4 years, right? So like they may play like it. So the three teams of the Big Ten East, the heavy hitters, right? Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. They're going to play each of those teams every other year, and then every other year or every other game that they play them will be an away game. So like once every 4 years, we'll see them travel across the country, right?
yep,
It'll happen multiple times per season, but we're not going to see them at Ohio State every year, right? It'll be
right,
every 4 years.
right.
So like it still will have some kind of air of like
Sure.
importance to see, the Trojans going into the horseshoe or whatnot. So I do kind of think that from an exciting perspective, like that is cool because it's something that we don't see a lot of, but we will get to see it more. But I don't think they're going to overload it to where they're going to Ann Arbor every year or every other season, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's a fair point, right? Because you do still kind of get that air, that mystique about those matchups for sure. And I think, the one of the bigger things about that is how big these conferences have gotten too, right? You just don't have enough. Hey, Jason, how you doing, bud? Thanks for tuning in again, bud. You don't have enough games in the schedule, right, to play
yeah.
every year. So yeah, you do get a little bit of that kind of mystique. But USC is going to travel, right? Every year they're going to be somewhere on the Midwest or the East Coast. Even they're going to play Maryland, Penn State, Rutgers. Um, you know, at some point on their conference schedule. So just it is interesting, but that's a good point, right? They're not going to travel super far east. They're going to keep regionally somewhat within the conferences.
Yeah.
And I think the ACC is the one that might be the farthest kind of out of reach in a lot of ways. And to see that they were trying to bring in Stanford and Oregon State was a little strange, but again, you're trying to figure out a way. I mean, Stanford's got like the biggest endowment in the country, so
Yep.
they've obviously got money within the university. So really interesting. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I think that the decision makers are going to figure out a way to make this feel normal in about 3, 4, 5 years. We'll all kind of forget about it, and USC will just be a seeming charter member of the Big Ten at some point, right? So.
Yep.
All right, well let's shift gears. Let's talk about kind of the here and now. Week 0, real quick. Any big takeaways for you? It was interesting to get some college football. There were some pretty good games in terms of the product on the field. Not a lot of great matchups. The Dublin thing was kind of neat. It's always fun to have that kind of start the season off with Notre Dame playing over there in front of the actual Irish. Um, they seem to have a quarterback, man. How dangerous do you think Notre Dame could be if Sam Hartman continues to play the way we've seen him play at Wake Forest, but now it
Yeah.
seems he might have some more weapons there in Notre Dame to work with?
Yeah, well, I mean, anytime, historically speaking, when a man loses a rib, bad things seem to happen to him. And Sam Hartman recently lost a rib. So just out of historical context, I can't imagine that's going to go well for them. No, Sam, not Sam, I said Howell. Sorry, it's
Hartman.
Sam Hartman, or as my friend Shane, who's a massive Notre Dame fan, calls him the Golden Dong because of his preseason picture they posted on Twitter. That being said, I think Notre Dame's a very good team. I don't really expect them to compete for the playoff. They'll probably get a New Year's Bowl, Sam Hartman has played a ton of college football. He knows what he's doing. Like, he's seen kind of every defense there is to throw at you in college. I don't imagine he'll be rattled at any point in the season. It's going to be they showed a stat during the game. I believe their leading receiver was a converted running back from last season who was playing in the slot, who had like 35 catches for his career. So I feel like that could be a detractor. Now, having an elite college quarterback kind of, what's the tide rises boats or something like that?
Yeah, rises tides, raises all boats.
Yeah, you nailed it. Thank you. Having that kind of elite level of college quarterback makes everybody on the field better, right? So it's just going to be a matter of how far he can carry them, and if those freshman receivers that they bring in can step up and make plays down the stretch.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, and that's a good point. That the weapons that I mentioned a moment ago are not proven savvy veteran weapons, right? It's the recruiting class that you're hoping Sam Hartman can bring along. And Jason in the comments may say a rolling tide sinks everyone else's boats, but we'll talk about Bama here coming up in a minute. But let's get to week one. We've got a big game on the docket for you and for Stove, who due to some schedule constraints can't be with us as much this year. He'll join us from time to time, but shout out to him. He's also a South Carolina Gamecocks fan. And week one, College Game Day is at Bank of America, a semi-neutral site. I believe it's a little closer to Columbia than it is to Chapel Hill. Not by a whole lot, but by a little bit of travel time. So you may see a little more turnout from the Gamecocks fans, but I expect UNC fans will travel well too. So it should be a pretty raucous crowd. Should be a lot of energy, big-time rivalry, Battle of the Carolinas, week one. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think for this game? Who you got winning this one? I know the line we're going to show in a moment is 2.5. So Vegas thinks it's going to be a very tight game. South Carolina had some momentum at the end of last season, whereas North Carolina kind of floundered down the stretch. Do you think South Carolina continues that momentum, or are they going to stumble on the Tar Heels here?
So this is an extremely historic college football matchup. It's Mac Brown versus Coach Beamer. Not the Coach Beamer that most people would think of, although I'm sure he will be in the building.
Oh yeah.
He goes to Frank will be there. He goes to, I believe he goes to every game, away and home, which is awesome. As a Virginia guy myself, it's nice to see a local.
Speaking of, I happen to be wearing a Tech shirt tonight. Shout out to Frank.
Not a Tech fan, but whatever.
Shout out to Frank.
Yeah, whatever. Beamer ball 2.0 is better, anyways. All right. That being said, I do expect South Carolina fans to show out. I've spent a little bit of time in the Emerald City down there in North Carolina. It's wonderful. The stadium is very nice. It's not the greatest stadium, but it is a nice stadium. There are a ton of South Carolina grads that moved to Charlotte to start their careers. It's a wonderful place for them. It's close enough, like you said, to Columbia that they can show out. They can go to home games, and now they're playing in Charlotte. I do expect it to be a very close game. I expect that it will be a high-scoring game. South Carolina finished the year last year on just an absolute offensive heater. Spencer Rattler was making all of the right decisions down the stretch. Played out of his mind against Tennessee, if y'all remember. He scored 63 points that game, I believe, through 5 touchdowns. They did stumble a little bit against Notre Dame in the bowl game, as we all remember. I'm sure we were all, just tuned in on pins and needles. And of course, we all know the quarterback on the other side, Drake May, second best odds to win the Heisman this year, projected top 5 pick, probably going to go number 2 behind Caleb Williams, who balled out the other night against San Jose State, who is better than people think. I expect it to be a lot of fun. Like we said, College Game Day is going there. The environment's going to be electric, even if it is a, quote, neutral site game. Both fan bases should be there showing out. College Game Day is always a good time. Every time I've been there, and I've been at least a handful of times, 5 or 6 times, I believe, to different game day sites, it's always fun. I'm going to give out, we're just giving the lines here, I believe. I'm going to give out USC plus 2.5, but I will be betting them on the money line. I believe it's plus 116 as currently constituted. So if you like some free money, put it on Beamer Ball 2.0. It is the infamous site of Shane Bieber being assaulted by a mayo cooler. So he's back for revenge, and it's going to be a good time. Buckle it up, boys. Let's roll them out.
Yeah, I like that pick. I just think that, from a defensive standpoint, I think South Carolina has a little more than North Carolina. I'm not sure they know how to spell defense in Chapel Hill the last 2-3 seasons. I mean, they had several games over the last couple of years that they've just had just track meets against teams you wouldn't like. They played Navy when Howell was still the quarterback, and that game was like 77-72 or something. It was unbelievable. So yeah, I just think from a defensive standpoint, between these two teams, if I expect one team to get a stop in a crucial moment that could swing this game, I lean towards South Carolina and Beamer ball, right? Attention to detail, good on special teams, and tough on defense. I think they're still trying to fill out that defense with athletes and recruiting classes, but I just trust their defense a little more than I trust North Carolina's. Take the over. This over could be 81, and I think I would take the over. Honestly, I expect this game to maybe even stress the 100-point mark. Potentially, we could see this game get into the 50s between these two teams. A lot of firepower on offense. If Rattler is anything like he was at the end of last season, they're going to put up plenty of points against North Carolina. And you mentioned Drake May, who some people may, by the end of this season, I believe some people may start arguing him over Caleb Williams even in next year's draft. I think it's going to be the obvious 1-2, and it's going to be that whole, remember the whole Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III debate. It's going to be similar to that. Even this past year with the Bryce Young, CJ Stroud kind of soft debate, but still a bit of a debate. I think we're going to see that with Drake May. I think he's just that good. But I do think South Carolina wins this game in a track meet. It's going to be fun. Tune in. College Game Day is there for a reason. Rivalry game, and it should be a ton of fun. And you mentioned the guest picker will be Darius Rucker. They're introducing it's the theme song for College Game Day, correct?
Yeah, so he and Lainey Wilson, I believe is her name, the girl from Yellowstone, and then a band, and I apologize for not remembering the name of the band, but it's someone I'd not heard of before. They kind of collab to roll out a new College Game Day theme song. RIP to David Pollock. The desk will not be the same without him there. Yeah. It still should be a good time, though.
Yeah, sure. McAfee will still bring the energy, but Pollock's so good. I didn't like that. I didn't like that change. He's so damn good on the desk.
There are a couple of names in this game that I would like to sensitize people to. Everybody knows Spencer Rattler because he's the quarterback, and everybody talks about quarterbacks. There is a running back named DeCarrion Joyner that 2 years ago started at quarterback for South Carolina in their bowl game against North Carolina in this stadium. And he really balled out, but he's playing running back for them this year. I believe he should be their main ball carrier. And everybody knows Juice Wells, I assume, probably the best returning wide receiver in the SEC this year. That may be up for debate with a couple of guys. But for my money, Juice Wells, shout out JMU transfers, came from the old Commonwealth. And then there's another name that people, I hope, will know as a household name or somewhat of a household name by the end of the year. His name is Nicholas Harbor. He is like 6'2", and no, he's 6'5", excuse me. He's 6'5", 240, and big boy. However, the coolest thing about him is that he broke Tyreek Hill's 100 and 200 meter or yard, whatever they do in track in college, record times. So this kid can flat out move with the ball. If they can get him the ball in space, it's a wrap.
Yeah.
So be on the lookout for those guys on the South Carolina side of the ball, obviously. Shout out to Gamecock Nation. Let's go, baby.
A boy that big that can move that fast. Woo.
Yep. Yep. Freak.
Yeah. It's like Randy Moss with a little more bulk.
Yes.
Crazy. All right, well let's roll right into week. We'll save week 1 picks for the end. So I want to talk a little bit about the playoff, right? I know it's way too early, right, to be talking about the playoff, but we're going to make our way too early predictions leading into the season on who we think the Final Four teams this year are going to be, and then who we think is going to win the championship. And when we roll back at the end of the year, we'll see who was right and who was incredibly wrong. and we'll go from there. So, why don't you go ahead first and give me one of your 4 teams that you've got in the playoff?
All right, so I will give you my pick, but I'll give an honorable mention.
Yeah.
I really, really, really wanted to pick Utah coming into this year to make the playoff. What they're building there, I think, is incredible. Nobody wins there at night. Like, you go to Ogden and you just lose. It's what happens.
It's like LSU at night.
Yeah, like the sun goes down and it's a different place.
Yeah, good luck.
Had Dalton Kincaid come back this year and Cam Rising was 100% healthy, I would have absolutely picked them to make the playoff. That being said, I'm not going to, although shout out to them. They're going to beat Florida this week, guys. Just a heads up. All right, so my first pick, I'm going to go kind of chalky here. It's a pick that I don't think is going to rattle too many cages, but I'm going to say Michigan. Michigan is really good. They brought back a lot of guys, including most of their offense from last year. They got some holes on the defensive side they need to replace from the draft from last season. But I believe as the year goes on, Jim Harbaugh is a very good coach and will get those guys ready to roll. So my first pick for the Final Four this year is Michigan.
Excellent. So I'm going to jump my order a little bit because I'm going to stay in the same conference as you. I love what Michigan's doing. I worry about that defense in that conference. I worry about that defense against Ohio State. I also worry about that defense against Penn State, who I'm going to put in the playoffs this year. I've been very down on James Franklin over a wide portion of his tenure there in Penn State because it seemed like for the first probably 5 years of his time in Penn State, they'd go on these crazy win streaks to start a season. They'd get into a big game against Michigan, a big game against Ohio State, a big game against Michigan State, and they'd lay a fucking egg. That didn't happen last year, and it kind of started to turn the corner 2 years ago. They didn't quite have the level of talent to compete last year with Michigan, who I thought was, other than Georgia and Alabama, I thought Michigan was the most complete team in college football last year. And I think it showed with their performance. They, obviously didn't get to the promised land that they wanted to get to, winning a national championship. But I think what James Franklin has done, kind of restocking the shelves, and I'm taking a chance. I'm taking a flyer a little bit, probably not on everybody's radar to get to the playoff. But I think Penn State's going to quiet some of the dissenting opinions on them this year. James Franklin's going to get over the hump, and I think that Penn State's going to win the Big Ten, and I think they're going to get into the playoff this year.
I like that pick. I really like Penn State this year, preseason number 7. James Franklin is a very good coach. Coaches are judged off of doing more with less. I don't think that he fits that bill as a great coach, in terms of doing more with less.
Yeah.
However, he has an opportunity to change that this year, right? They have a very, very good roster. Their defense is incredible, and they brought in a quarterback that they think could be a stud. That being said, they don't have the most talented roster, but if James Franklin is able to, I hesitate to say take a leap because he's been a very good coach in the past, but if he's able to kind of cross that threshold and beat the Ohio State, beat the Michigan, win that Big Ten, if they win the Big Ten, they're going to get in, right? But I could very easily see that roster and that coaching staff kind of make that jump into the elite category. I really like that pick, actually.
Yeah, I like you mentioned bringing in a new quarterback. I think that's been kind of the missing piece for them because, hey, Dad, thanks for joining.
Howdy.
Yeah, glad to have you here, bud. Bud, Dad. The big thing for me has been quarterback play the last, 3-4 years, really, with Penn State has kind of been their detriment when they get into the bigger games. They just can't seem to convert big third downs. They can't seem to finish drives. I think it makes a difference, and don't sleep on that receiving core because quietly they've been putting studs in the NFL the last 6 years under James Franklin. One in our backyard, Jahan Dotson, who is for all you fantasy football players out there in the mid rounds, you can get a guy who's going to be a stud for you. But we know they're going to be able to run the ball no matter who's in the backfield because that's really what they do in terms of that offensive scheme. If they get solid quarterback play out of the transfer, I like them this year. I don't know. It's a gut feeling in a way, but that's my curveball for the playoffs. Is Penn State knocking off
Drew
big dogs in the Big Ten and getting to a playoff.
Drew Aller, by the way, just the quarterback. Drew Aller,
Yep.
sophomore.
Yep. All right. Give me another pick. Who else you got in the playoff?
This is a pick that may be a little surprising. Given historical context, it's not surprising at all. But I think that coming into this year, some people are a little down on this team, which is almost why I'm up on them. I'm going to pick Alabama. I know that the sexy picks in the SEC this year are LSU and Georgia. However, it seems to me that nobody's talking about Alabama being really good, right? It almost feels to me like this is a throwback year for Nick Saban. He's watched Kirby Smart, his former assistant, go and run these high-flying offenses with Todd Monken, who's now gone, by the way, at Georgia, with their tight ends and their running backs and their walk-on quarterback who didn't start for 3 years. And Nick Saban is over here in Tuscaloosa, who, by the way, last year they lost 2 games by a combined 3 points.
Right.
They lost on a field goal, a game-winning field goal as time expired in Neyland Stadium, and then lost an over. Yes, both on the road, and they lost an overtime game
in Death Valley and in Tennessee.
Exactly. Now
against the number 3 at the time, I believe they ended up number 2 after beating Bama.
Yeah.
And then of course playing in Death Valley down there.
Yeah.
In LSU and Baton Rouge.
Yes. Now I'm fully ready to admit that
I'm still pissed Ohio State got in over them.
Yeah, I mean, the way Ohio State played Georgia, it looked to me like they deserved it though. Like,
look, fine. Results on the field speak for themselves. I'll give you that. Give you that. But I'm still mad that Ohio State got boat raced in their own backyard.
Yep.
And got in over a Bama team that lost 2 games on the road by by a field goal combined. Both games by less than a field goal.
I agree. So I fully am ready to admit that Bryce Young is gone, and we don't. I looked earlier. I didn't see who the starting quarterback was.
He's not going to announce it until they get there Saturday.
But that's totally fine by me because
Georgia started. That's such a Saban move, though.
Yeah. I mean, like Georgia is also starting a quarterback that we don't know anything about. Like we know about him, right? He played in some cleanup duty, but like, what does that really show us, right? So to me, they're almost going in on even playing fields. And Georgia, we've said this the last 2 years, has lost so much talent to the NFL, but so has Alabama, just the same amount, right? I'm in on Alabama this year. I think they're going to be really good. I'm not worried about LSU. That may be my bias against Brian Kelly, family and all that stuff that he picked up down there in the South for some reason.
Accent immediately.
I'm in on Alabama. I'm putting them in the playoff. They will win the SEC West and probably play Georgia in the conference title game. But I'm in on Alabama. They're going to the playoff.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. Bama to me, I'll go back to last year just one more time. I think that the most happy person on the planet to see that Ohio State got in over Alabama was Kirby Smart. Mm-hmm. There's no way that he wanted to play Alabama in that playoff game, knowing that Bryce Young was healthy. Let's not discount the fact that Bryce Young was also not healthy against Tennessee, but he was healthy going into the postseason last year. So, Bama to me, they're so loaded defensively again. Family. They're so loaded defensively, and they've got so much talent at running back and at wide receiver that I could probably play quarterback for them, and they win 8, 9, 10 games.
But you're an elite quarterback, Gary. So I mean,
yeah, I'm a great quarterback, Division I caliber, bud. But no, I'm with you. Alabama's, a second team that I'm going to put into the playoffs. I think they're going to run the table. I think Saban is going to use a lot of this kind of off-season hype that we've seen, especially with the talking heads talking about Georgia being a dynasty now, to really motivate his team. And I don't know that there are many guys who can motivate teams quite like a Nick Saban can when it comes to leveraging the media and leveraging that coverage and that exposure. Bill Belichick, right? And of course, they're friends and they kind of come from the same background and tree. But yeah, Saban's going to have the boys hungry. They may not decide who their quarterback is literally until they get off the bus, or maybe he's already made a decision and he's just being Nick Saban and playing coy, right? But I look at that roster and the way they were able to continue to just load the cupboards with playmakers on offense. They're going to be able to do a lot of things, and they have a system in place now when it comes to offense that they run a certain style. It was always kind of weird when Saban was changing offensive coordinators all the damn time. But they're kind of developing that consistency. So I'm with you. Bama getting into the playoffs.
What is that phrase? Hell no wrath, like a woman scorned.
Yeah, like a Saban.
Yeah, college football knows no wrath, like a Saban scorned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good luck, boys.
All right. Who's your third team getting then?
So this is where it gets a little tricky for me. I really want to put a Pac-12 team in. I really, really do. And I really want
Utah. They were an honorable mention for me as well. I don't want to spoil too much, but I love Cam Rising.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that they're going to struggle a little bit on offense, losing a guy like Kincaid and not I don't know that they restocked with a playmaker that can really stack up to him. And not many people can stack up to what Kincaid was able to do in college. But
no,
sorry, go ahead.
Probably. He probably does. You're probably correct.
He probably does.
So, all right. So, selfishly, I really want to put Southern Cal in and see Caleb Williams play in a playoff. They did bring in, I believe they brought in 8 defensive transfers, and 7 of them are starting for them this year. So, that's a bonus for them. However, Michael Penix is at Washington. Bo Nix is at freaking Oregon. DJ Uiagalelei is at Oregon State. They have a great running back at Oregon State. That offense is going to be phenomenal, in my opinion. I think the Pac-12 teams beat up on each other this year. And so for that reason, I can't see a Pac-12 team getting into the playoff. I think they probably make like 3 New Year's Day bowls between the whole conference, and it's going to be very competitive.
They might.
So this is where my struggle lies, right? So I said that Alabama is going to win the SEC West. I really don't want Georgia to win the SEC East, but I really don't see a path for them not to. And a one-loss Georgia, whether it's during regular season and they win the SEC title or one loss where they lose to Alabama in the title game, I think Georgia gets back to the playoff. I think they're going to be really good. I know I said all those disparaging things during my Alabama segment, but Georgia still has a ton of talent. They still have Brock Bowers, who's one of the best offensive players in the entire country. I think Georgia gets in. I think they're probably a 1, potentially a 2-loss team. If Carolina can sneak them at home in week 3, that'd be phenomenal. But I see Georgia back in the playoff again.
Yep, I'm with you on this one too. So we're in lockstep, 2 teams out of the SEC. I wanted really, really badly to put Kentucky here because I love what Stoops is doing there, and I know the hype train is crazy there. But as you and I talked about with Devin Leary, I don't trust him as much as I trusted Will Levis. And the way I looked at it was the only path I see for Georgia not to make the playoff is if another SEC East team runs the table. And I tried to stack, right, who's got a chance to run the table in the SEC East. And it was like Kentucky's the maybe kind of next in line. I don't want to spoil necessarily, what I worry about with Tennessee for even with week 1, but I don't know that Tennessee reloaded at quarterback the way they needed to after losing Hendon Hooker. So I just think Georgia, even if they win the SEC East, losing the SEC title game to Alabama, a 1-loss Georgia team gets in over 95% of the rest of college football. So,
yep.
I wasn't going to pick Kentucky to run the table because I just don't trust them under center. I think they're going to be plucky. I think they're going to challenge everybody every week because that's what Stoops is doing there. But they just don't – you can't get the talent in football to Lexington to really compete with what the fuck's going on down in Athens.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think that SEC East is going to be more competitive in that 2 through 5 spot than in years past.
Yeah.
I think Florida might have a chance to sneak up on some people potentially with some of that talent they've got defensively. But all right, who's your fourth and final playoff team that you got into the playoff?
There's a phrase. They have it in Texas. I'm sure they have it in Tennessee too. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again. I've been fooled about 35 times by this franchise, and I'm ready to get fooled again, baby. Horns up.
Hook 'em.
Hook 'em, baby. Like give me Texas. Give me Texas.
Like that. He's a big Horns fan.
give me Quinn Ewers. Old buddy may have finally figured out his footwork situation because he has all of the arm talent in the world. He has every conceivable throw in the book. He's not a great decision maker, and his footwork is messy, or at least it has been. God bless W. Yes, sir. That's my boy, 43. I like Texas a lot this year. I think the Big 12 is probably down a little bit. TCU is not going to run the table in that conference again. Baylor, who knows what you're going to get from them week to week, honestly. Oklahoma, I'm not a fan of this year. I'm kind of down on them. Kansas State is always entertaining. They're not always great, but they're definitely always entertaining. I just think that Texas is kind of head and shoulders above the rest of that conference. And OU still sucks. Love it.
Speaking of rivalries.
Yeah, right. I have historically been a Texas hater, but I think that this might be the year, and I'm ready to be wrong again.
I've had a soft spot for Texas since VY, and then Colt McCoy after him. I liked Colt. I just like you. It seems every year. Even on this podcast, the last 2 years that Stove and I have been doing Tailgate, I've been the first one to say, like, I don't know, is Texas back? They'll get a big win during the season. I'm like, I don't know, is Texas back? And then the next week they lose to, like, Southwest Missouri State on a field goal at the buzzer. So it's in sorry, Ro, I hate to say that, but it's the truth here. And I would love for it, one, so that Raul could enjoy it, but two, because like I said, I do have a soft spot for Texas. I'd like to see him succeed. I like the burnt orange. It's one of those colors that I see and I'm like, that looks really cool on a uniform. But I can't do it. I don't trust Quinn Ewers. I do think that Texas in the next 3 years is going to be in a playoff, but I don't think it's going to be with Quinn Ewers. I think it's going to be with touchdown Jesus from the state of Louisiana. But my fourth team getting in, I'm sorry, Bentley.
Oh, no.
I just think that the path this year is too easy for Clemson. And an undefeated Clemson team gets into the playoff over other teams that are probably going to end up with us. Their conference schedule is weak. I don't know why Florida State's ranked number 8. I can't believe that that's the case. I like Cade Klubnik. I know it hurts you to hear me.
I can't believe you just said that to me, to my face.
I know. I'm glad we're on camera.
Yeah, if you said that about 7 hours ago.
I might be spitting some chiclets here, but yeah, I look at their schedule. I look at the talent that Dabo is able to continue to bring in to Clemson, and it adds up to me. I just think they're going to run the table because the ACC fucking blows. It's blown for about 10 years now. It's not even a major conference to me anymore. I know it's still one of the Power Five, but to me in the sport of football, it is not a Power Five conference. I don't see anybody challenging them in that conference, and they got rid of DJ. Whatever Dabo's loyalty was to DJ the last 2 years, he cost himself, probably, honestly. And I know he was recruiting some of those Samoan players from the islands, so partially that, I'm sure. But I like Cade Klubnik. I like what he can do on the field, and they just have so much talent that I just think they're going to dwarf the rest of the ACC this year. I think the ACC blows.
All right, hear me out.
I'm not telling you they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. I want to clarify that. I'm not
fine.
telling you I think that Clemson is one of the 4 best teams in the country. I just think that an undefeated Clemson team gets into the playoffs, and I look at the ACC and their schedule, and I think Clemson is going to be undefeated going into the playoffs.
All right, hear me out.
If Knox knock them off the end of the season, we can all be happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely, 100%. But I'll let me lay out a scenario for you. Yep. I'll give you the South Carolina win to Clemson. Clemson goes undefeated, wins the ACC. Week 2, Texas plays at Alabama.
Ooh.
It's a close game, shootout. Texas loses by field goal. Wins the Big 12. Alabama loses to Georgia in the SEC title game. So you have the Big 10 winner. You have Georgia, SEC title champion. You have 1-loss Alabama. You have undefeated Clemson, ACC champion, and you have 1-loss Texas, who has a close loss on the road at Alabama in week 2. Who goes in? Texas or Clemson? You tell me.
That's a killer scenario. If I'm the selection committee in that scenario, Texas gets in. Yes. I will tell you that Texas gets in that scenario. However, I think the committee would still put an undefeated Clemson team in because I look at the committee has this weird soft spot for the ACC. They always have. Like Clemson has gotten favor in so many ways since we went to the playoff system. Do
you mean like when Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence were there? Like when 2, top picks in the NFL draft were there?
Yeah, sure, but I think the seeding, the way they were seeded, they got favorable matchups in the playoff.
Okay.
I just think that the committee would put an undefeated Clemson in because I think the committee still looks at the ACC as a Power 5 school just because of it technically, right?
Sure.
It still is, but in my eyes and in your eyes, it sounds like, right? And I think in most people's eyes in terms of fans of college football, the ACC is not a Power 5 conference.
Sure.
It's just not, so.
Okay, I'm going to hope for that scenario.
I would love that scenario to play out, and I would love to see Dabo fucking on the fucking pain train crying about the fact that a 1-loss Texas team got in over an undefeated Clemson team. I'm a Clemson hater. I am. I'm just being a realist when I'm talking about playoffs and all that. I just think that the schedule's too easy for Clemson in terms of the ACC. If they can knock off Beamer Ball at the end of the season, I think they're undefeated. Nobody's going to beat them in the ACC, and they're just going to get selected over other teams.
Yeah, well, they still have to beat me.
All right. We got about 7
in Columbia. Sorry.
Yeah, in Columbia. So I'd love it if they could knock them off. It'd be great. It'd be great. We got about 7 minutes. So real quick, who's your national champion?
Oh, brother. Alabama gets in. Alabama wins it.
I'm with you. I think this is a redemption year for Nick Saban. I think he's, from a coaching perspective, he's on a mission. He's not going to let them run into situations. It's been weird the last probably year and a half. We've seen some like mistakes from Bama that we don't normally see. It's weird penalties here. It's losing your cool and getting a personal foul there. None of that shit's going to happen this year, I don't think. Saban's on a fucking warpath. Quarterback or no, they might just not play with a quarterback and still win.
Hey, fuck it, whatever works, man.
All right, last little bit here. We've got picks for week 1. I'm going to pop them up on the screen. Picks against the spread. Anywhere you see a steamroller, ESPN didn't have a line for it because it's such a big-time underdog or big-time favorite against a much smaller school in a tune-up game to start the season. You see some big spreads, some big lines. There are some tight ones. Bentley mentioned Utah, Florida earlier. And then we've got, obviously, South Carolina, North Carolina as a field goal line. And then after that, Clemson's kind of the closest in terms of tightest line for a top 25 team. Give me one of these games. Actually, Tulane, I'm sorry. They're 6.5 as well. They're a touchdown line. So I think Tulane's a little bit of a surprise ranking, to be honest. But I like what they've done there. They've had a consistent program the last few years. Give me one game that you're highlighting here that you want to talk about from week 1 that you're really going to have your eyes on to maybe gauge a team that's expected to be good or gauge a team that's, kind of on the fringe and you want to see how they do in week 1.
So Myself and I believe a lot of other passionate college football fans are going to have our eyes locked on Deion Sanders. Coach Prime bringing Colorado up against former or last year's playoff contender, last year's playoff team, national title contender, TCU, right? TCU lost a lot of talent, lost their quarterback, their number one receiver, and I'm sure some other guys who I'm just forgetting right now off the top of my head. So I apologize for that. And then I believe the number was like 59 transfer portal students went to Colorado.
Crazy.
It's like they can't all be bad, right? I
Right.
mean, now a lot of them did come with him, including his quarterback, his son Shador. They came from Jackson State, where the competition level is not great.
Yeah.
Colorado was one of the 5 worst college football teams in the country last year. So the cards are kind of stacked against them. And I have the line somewhere right here on my second monitor. 21 points, right?
Yep.
20 and a half, 21.
Yep.
I'd take him at 20 and a half too.
Yep.
Nobody gets a crowd or his team pumped up like Deion Sanders, right? A little different than the way prime time, right? A little different than the way that Nick Saban does it. To similar effects so far in their careers, right? Obviously, Deion hasn't had the longevity success that Saban has, but short-term success is there for sure. We've seen him do it. We've seen him do it everywhere he's been. It was really just Jackson State, but it counts.
He had that prep program that was really successful.
Yeah, I mean he's coached before, but talking like big time college football, Jackson State was kind of his first stop, right? I'm not in on Colorado for the season, right? But I'm in on Colorado for this weekend. 3 touchdowns is a lot of points. I don't think Colorado is going to be as bad as some people project them to be. Now, a lot of people are projecting them to be very, very good, and I'm not in on that. But I think that TCU is very overvalued here. 21's a lot. Give me Colorado in the points, man.
I'm with you. My eyes are locked on Coach Prime the first few weeks. I want to see how it plays out. I know we're going to get sound bites. I know we're going to get, especially if they're winning games and they're knocking off these Division I teams, especially a carryover playoff team from last year. No matter how you feel about TCU and who they were last year, they were a playoff team, big measuring stick for Colorado this week. One team I do want to highlight, we've talked about them a lot in the past because Aaron Outhouse is a UTSA Roadrunner fan. Dark horse team.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on them because they may potentially run the table. Frank Harris is back. He's a elder statesman there at UTSA, playmaker. A lot of people like to kind of make the weird comparison to Michael Vick because he's athletic and left-handed. He's not quite Michael Vick, but he is kind of that guy in that conference. Keep an eye on them. Aaron, we might be talking about a ranked UTSA team down the stretch that's trying to convince the committee that they belong in as that group of 5 team to sneak into the, New Year's Day bowl games, or maybe we get some talk about we should be in the playoffs because we're undefeated, right? Just keep an eye on UTSA though. A lot of savvy veteran talent there, especially at the quarterback position, which is obviously the most important position in football. All right, Bentley, appreciate you, bud. Really excited for a new season.
Yes.
Got to bounce here on a hard out, but apologies to those watching that we started a little late. We'll be on time next week. It's my fault. We'll be on time next week. We'll talk some week 1 results, and we'll give you a little bit of a preview for week 2. Appreciate everybody. Thanks for all the comments and the interaction. We are out.